Hello, everybody, and thanks for coming. I am Nicole Burt. I'm in charge of human health and evolutionary medicine here at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, which is a great place to hold this particular discussion on anatomy and dissection. We have the Hammond Todd as one of the biggest research collections, utilized research collections for human osteology. Right here, we have some of our teaching specimens up here. We have a male and a female skeleton. If you haven't had a chance to look at them, you should on your way out. Don't touch them, but you may look at them. And hopefully everybody had a chance to look around the museum a little bit before they came up. If not, please feel free to do that on your way out. And we're just very happy to be hosting this event and that you're all here with us today.
Great, thank you.
Brandy.
Oh, yes. Hi.
So my name is Brandy Schillace, and I'm at the Dittrich Medical History Center and Museum, and I have with me actually Jim Edmondson, who is the chief curator. And we are hosting, or well, actually we're not hosting today, but we're bringing these events out to the public beyond the walls because the Dittrich Medical History Center has a very large collection, and what we're trying to do is start a conversation. So it's not just that we want you to come to the museum and see exhibits. Well, we want to hear from you. We want you to be stakeholders, and we want you to take part in a discussion about the kinds of things that medical history has to offer. And there's kind of a then and now component. So this particular talk, Bodies Wanted, we're going to be talking about anatomy and dissection and grave robbing, and things that happened in history. But I also have with me Richard Drake. Dr. Drake is the editor of the Students' Gray's Anatomy, and we're going to be doing a little mini panel or conversation up here after the talk. After that is when it gets really interesting, and that's when all of you are going to be involved. We're going to break you into smaller groups, round tables, and I have some questions that are going to be passed out. And I hope if you have pens, you can write down answers, but you'll discuss these in your smaller groups. Then we'll return to a large group and have one big public forum and discussion and conversation about the things that we talked about tonight. So I'm really excited to have you here, and we're very happy to see your smiling faces. It is being filmed, and when we it is being filmed, and when I ask questions, when you guys ask questions, I'll have you stand up so that we can see you in the cameras and things like that. So again, welcome, and we're going to get started. Okay. So, Bodies Wanted. It's kind of an interesting idea that the human body can become potentially a commodity. Death is something that happens to everyone, and sometimes we're prepared for it, and sometimes we're not, but it's a big part of medical practice. Medicine isn't just about saving lives, it's about learning how the body works. So this talk has some supporters. I wanted to mention them: the Cleveland Medical Library Association, the Inamori International Center for Ethics and Excellence, who are happily providing for the filming, the Dittrich Medical History Center, and also the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, in which you now sit. This is us, by the way. We're not that far away. Please do come visit us. We're across from Severance Hall. I like to think of us as Severance Light. Kind of looks like that. Okay, so let's have a discussion. Anatomy, frequently thought of as the cornerstone of medicine. It's also frequently thought about as a rite of passage. This is something that Jim Edmondson has co-written a book about. We'll talk about later. But this was something practiced by doctors and was considered to be, really, we think of it as standard. Of course, doctors dissect bodies. Of course, they perform anatomy. And yet, it wasn't always so. Interestingly enough, dissection and anatomy has been a little bit of a contested thing over time. There was a period of history where there was a prohibition on dissecting human bodies. So, for instance, Galen, in about 100 AD, used to do quite a bit of work on gladiators, trying to get them ready for the ring again. And he was performing medicine. He needed to know how the body worked, but he couldn't dissect bodies. So how do you make that happen? Well, by comparative anatomy. So he looked at pigs and dogs, and as a result, some of his facts were wrong. Pigs' livers and human livers are similar, but not quite the same. It's also true that he thought that the human femur must be curved because the dog's femur was. And what's interesting is even after those errors were cleared up, people were so attached to Galen, his work has been standard for so long, that people said, well, you know, it's probably all those tights we wore in the Renaissance that straightened the leg bone. So really, Galen's work was primary for a very long time until you get to Andreas Vesalius. Vesalius is often called the father of modern anatomy. And I really like working with Vesalius, partly because he was bold in what he had to say. He wrote his own, he did his anatomy, and he actually has himself dissecting, a picture of himself dissecting. Now, why would that be particularly striking? Because doctors didn't always do the dissection. It just so happens that in history, and again, I'm going to thank Jim for some of these slides. It just so happens in history, the doctors, what you have up here, he's going to be looking at Galen's book and telling you what these gentlemen down here are actually finding in the body. So there's a disconnection between who's reading the texts and knowing them, having the medical knowledge, and who's actually dissecting. And what's interesting is that, of course, if someone down here is pulling out something that doesn't agree with what Galen says, they're going to assume something's wrong with the body, not that there's something wrong with Galen. So for a really long time, you have these moments where the teacher is talking about the dissection but not actually dissecting, as opposed to later where the instruction and the students were actually taking part in the dissection. Now this takes off, because once you have, and really timing is everything, Vesalius's Fabric of the Human Body comes out, and he beats a couple other people to the punch, including Charles there. He kind of was late to the game. And as a result, the Fabric of the Human Body became just really hugely successful. And it's beautiful. I don't know if you've ever seen photographs of it. It's the walking dead bodies. They've got no skin, but it's like happy zombies, really. But it's a beautiful work, and it corrects a lot of errors, but not all the errors. The funny thing about anatomy and medicine and knowledge is that you bring knowledge with you. So, for instance, Vesalius actually has in female anatomies drawn in tubes that connect the breasts to the ovaries, because that was something they thought existed. It isn't actually there, but it shows up in some of the anatomies. So the funny thing is, on one hand, anatomy is all about seeing into the body, right, and seeing clearly for the first time. On the other hand, you're interpreting what you find when you get there through the lens of what's accepted in your time period. They actually thought that menses, menstrual blood, transformed into breast milk when you got pregnant because one stopped and the other one started. It's logical. They're wrong. It's wrong. That's not true, just in case. But as a result, that's where this idea that there must be something connecting the two evolves from. So again, what you see is not always exactly what you see. It's what you see and what you interpret. So anatomy provided a new way of seeing into the body. And being able to do this, being able to dissect, you as a medical doctor or medical student, being able to go in and really see what is involved gives you an edge. It provides a number of things. Privileged access. Today, most of us can quickly go online or other places to see what the inside of our bodies look like. We can find out where our stomachs are. We can figure out where the liver is. We have a general sense of where things go. This isn't the case before anatomies are widely available. They were very expensive. You wouldn't necessarily be buying one for your kid to play with, at least not early on. So it's a privileged kind of access. People are getting to see into the body, and it's going to be medical students, and it's a special kind of viewing. It's also hands-on training. We have a lovely graduate student named Catherine Osborne who writes blog posts for us, and in one of them, she begins by saying, let's assume you're sick, it's the 19th century, you're going to the doctor, you really hope he's had some practice. You really hope he's seen inside a body before. And I think that's true. Most of us assume that the doctors we see have performed anatomies, have opened a body, are familiar what's there, and so it's hands-on training, and it provides something new. A new understanding of disease and causation too. So one of the things that we have at the District Museum is the Blaufox Hall of Diagnostics. And these diagnostic instruments, including the stethoscope, provided a brand new way of seeing into the body before you died, which is handy if you're the patient. So one of the things that happens is Laennec, who is the father of the stethoscope, he begins to see a connection between what he hears and what kinds of diseases people are dying from, because he's actually getting a chance to dissect the bodies at the hospital. And that's an incredible connection. So I heard a noise, I saw this patient dies, I open the body, I do a dissection, and I see this disease. So you're not just having a privileged way of seeing, but it's changing understanding. And there's a connection that's being made between disease and causation, and also being able to diagnose patients who are still alive. And it provides a new way of seeing medicine as scientific. So this is, Hunter has the gravid uterus. We actually have these atlases, these anatomical atlases at the Dittrich, and they're enormous. They're full size, they're great big books. And William Smellie also has the anatomical tables. And as you can see, they're quite beautiful. There's a way in which the babies inside still look alive, almost seem like they're sleeping. That's not true of all of the tables. There's a big difference between Hunter and Smellie. Hunter's anatomical tables tend to show bodies that look like they're deceased and dissected. Smellie's works tend to look more cross-sectional, softer perhaps, almost like it's still a living body that you're looking through an X-ray at. This is before X-ray. Why is the difference? Well, once again, what you see is influenced by what you bring to what you're looking at. So Hunter was very interested in pathology. So for him, the disease, the death, what caused the death of these women who were pregnant is very important. And so you see it has a much more pathological turn. It has a much more sense that, okay, this is death, this is what's happened. Smellie was interested in showing how to deliver babies. So his tend to look like, and then you would do this, and this is how you would get the baby out. And so obviously, it's less important for him to make those bodies appear as though they are dead. So what you see isn't always what you get. So obviously, there are clear benefits. It's a good thing. See inside the body. Learn new things. So why would it also be taboo? Why would there be religious prohibitions against it? And why would the public be so concerned? In other words, what were they worried about? Well, where are you getting those bodies? Historical sourcing is a problem, and people were worried about body snatching for various purposes. Yes, that's from Young Frankenstein, if you're not familiar. You know, Abby Normal, stealing brains. People were worried about anatomy because there wasn't always an easy way to get a hold of bodies. Remember, this is before there's refrigeration. The preservation techniques are quite different. What you normally would do is you used a marble slab because it would help cool the body. Dissections were practiced in winter instead of summer for very obvious reasons. But that still didn't mean that bodies were easy to come by. How do you find enough bodies to dissect? There's not a body donation program. Chances are you found them where they lay, in the ground, in their graves. So there's huge fear that your loved ones are going to be dug up for science. So much fear, in fact, that people who could afford it actually constructed these rather elaborate caging systems around graves to keep people out of them, or vaults, or they would hire people to stand guard. Just a question. If you can hire people to stand guard and build elaborate cages around graves, probably what socioeconomic status are you? You've got money. So that means a lot of the graves that were being robbed belonged to who? The poor and minorities as well. People who didn't have access to the money or the friends or associates that could protect them from grave robbery. And this gets messier through legal action. In 1832 in England, you have an Anatomy Act, and it wasn't necessary. If you read the act, it wasn't trying to be nefarious, but people called it things like the Dead Body Bill and the Dissecting Bill. and the Blood-Stained Anatomy Act. That's my favorite. And it was called this because people felt that it was basically allowing easier access to bodies in a way that didn't really feel right to people, and it affected certain classes of people more than others, and it was followed by the 1834 Poor Law. And the Poor Law basically allowed greater access to the bodies of the laboring poor in England. So, if you have an Anatomy Act that allows you access to bodies, and then you have an act that says the laboring poor is up for grabs, you can understand why this upset people. This is a Chartist. They were arguing for reforms in Parliament, and he says, if they were poor, they imprisoned them, then they starved them to death, and then after they were dead, they butchered them. So his point was that, you literally just stuck them in poorhouses so they would die, so that you could get a hold of their bodies. And there were similar problems in the US. The US problems differ, though, in a couple significant ways. Excuse me. One is that the greatest threat wasn't necessarily to the laboring poor. It was to minorities, particularly African Americans. And there were graves of African Americans that were basically constantly being farmed, so to speak, to pull up bodies. But it doesn't mean that no one else was worried about it. The doctors' riot of 1788 happened in New York City. And what happens here is you'd had already a lot of people clamoring about the use of bodies in the poor Potter's Field and the black graveyards. But people weren't really listening very carefully. What happens in 1788 is the body of a white woman is taken from Trinity Church grounds. And this incites an absolute riot. 20 people are killed in this riot. 20 people. And that's just enormous. I mean, a body has been stolen that's already died, and the result are 20 more deaths. Why? Because, and I'm actually loosely quoting this, they failed to follow the prudent protocol of stealing only the poor. So, you can understand that even when people were upset about it, they were upset along class and race lines, and that continues to be an issue for quite some time. This book is called Dissection. It's actually for sale at the Dittrich Museum, and it was co-authored by James Edmondson and Dr. John Warner. And it's looking at photography as a rite of passage. So you have anatomy students, and they are getting very intimate knowledge of these bodies that they're dissecting, and they're also taking photographs of themselves with the bodies. And there's a lot of these photographs. Jim tells a story that when he first saw the pictures, he thought, oh, what an odd thing. And then when the donor brought the rest of the photographs, there were so many of them just on this table. It's like, okay, not an odd thing. Clearly something that was done all the time. Why was that? Well, it goes back to that first point I was making about dissection and anatomy being a kind of rite of passage that allows privileged access. So here you can see some students, and they've put some words on the table. It says, such the vultures love. But there's all kinds of these images that are available in the book. Sometimes they're playing around. Sometimes it's what Jim calls tomfoolery. Other times they're very serious images. But essentially, you have people photographing themselves doing this very strange, slightly taboo activity that nonetheless sets them apart as doctors. Problems: sourcing, preserving, avoiding detection, and then actually learning while you're at it. The learning part is the important bit. The problem with bodies goes back again to trying to find them, and where are you going to get them from, and is it illegal to dig up bodies? What do you think? Is it illegal to dig up bodies? Yes, it is illegal. But it was also illegal in the sense that most of the authorities looked the other way. And there were reasons for doing that. It was quiet. As long as nobody knew what was going on, everything should be fine. This is Horace Ackley. I like to say the man, the myth. He was an interesting fellow. Did some amazing things, helped single-handedly stop a cholera outbreak in Sandusky, rode there all night, didn't rest or sleep for 4 days, did all sorts of wonderful charitable things, attacked a bank with a sledgehammer and an angry mob, might have possibly shot at one of his patients. So he was an interesting fellow. But he was great. He was very passionate, and one of the things that he really cared about were his students. And he wanted his students to have appropriate and easy access to bodies for dissection and for the purposes of getting really good at their craft. Along comes the year of 1855. December 5th, 1855, and a story that had been, a practice that had been kind of ignored by the authorities suddenly bursts onto the scene with a lot of headlines when a student of Horace Ackley's, Dr. Proctor Thayer, is caught with some other medical students stealing a body from Woodland Cemetery. This actually was in the paper, this little poem up here. Rattle his bones over the stones, he's only a pauper who nobody owns. It's November, and basically they were attempting to source a body. And here's a map. It actually doesn't come across very well here, but the Cleveland Infirmary is down here. Woodland Cemetery is over there. So you've got, and the Cleveland Medical School is here. So it's a nice little triangulation. According to Horace Ackley, grave robbing was okay because it was for the benefit of the living. And essentially, he felt that paupers only had one friend while they were alive, as the doctor, and so the doctor ought to profit. And this is what he says during the trial. Find me if you like, but not the boys, for they did only what I told them to do. The body they were after was that of a pauper from the poorhouse, who had no friends. The man served no good purpose in life, and his body was justly forfeited to medical science for the benefit of the living. So in this very strange argument, Horace is basically saying, it's a good use of poor people to dissect their bodies for science. And this was something that was, in fact, widely accepted. But suddenly it appears in the paper, and you have an outpouring of opinion pieces. And there was a number of people who did accuse them and said, these are bloody deeds. This is, humanity cries out against this use of the poor. You can't do these things. This isn't going to work. This is bad news. On the other hand, there were plenty of supporters who said, but they need skill. Where else are they going to learn it from? One of the opinion pieces said, would you rather them try this out on the living? They need practice. They need to practice. And by the way, it's not only the practice of dissection here. A lot of things they talk about is proximity to death, actually just getting used to the fact that they're dealing with dead bodies, a desire for new knowledge, but also this idea that it's a rite of passage and that it's for the common good. Now, Horace was willing to stand in the gap for his students, and he tried to get some other things passed. First, he said, well, what if all of the poor people signed waivers that said it was okay? So then they wrote up some waivers and had a lot of illiterate people sign them, so probably they couldn't read it. Horace was one of those guys, you know what I'm saying? The other thing that he tried to do was say, well, let's give us greater access. Let's make it legal then. Let's make it legal so then we don't have to illegally steal bodies. What if we just were able to take them from the poorhouse on death? I mean, it would actually save a lot of time and trouble. I've studied grave robbery in England and America. There were differences of practice, but they were pretty efficient. For one thing, if you've watched Young Frankenstein, you see them all getting down to the grave and then lifting the coffin up out of there. They didn't do that. First of all, how did they get under it in the first place? Always drove me crazy in the movie. They would go in, they would just dig up the first part, right around where the head was. They would break in through the coffin lid, tie a rope around the head, and then pull the body out that way, and then put everything back. And they usually stripped the body of any identifying markers and left them in the grave, and then put back the flowers and whatever else had been there, because you wanted a body that was relatively fresh. This means actually that a lot of Jewish graveyards were also pilfered, one of the reasons being that they buried the dead so quickly after death. I believe it's by sunset or within a certain period of time. So they were also people who were targeted to a certain degree. Horace was not successful. They went to committee. They couldn't agree on this law. It went back and forth and back and forth. Ultimately, what they decided to do was say, okay, the infirmary directors will be in charge of what happens to the bodies. And they can either allow them to be buried or they can give them to the doctors, but they can't tell anyone. So they made it legal, illegal, legal. So basically, they just hid the practice again, and things went back to normal. So why is it so haunting? Why are we so worried about this? Is it just because we don't want the bodies of our loved ones to be dissected? Is it just because we don't want in our final hour, this is another one of the opinion pieces, said, what woman in her final hour wants to think that, a day hence she'll be on a slab? Not very many of them. But there's another reason that people were worried about this, and that goes back to two men who've been immortalized in movies, Burke and Hare. Burke and Hare were also resurrection men. Resurrection men are the ones that you paid to go source bodies for you if you couldn't do it yourself. They were just impatient resurrection men, so they couldn't wait for people to die. So they helped. And they ended up killing quite a number of people, and ultimately Burke and Hare were caught, and Hare turned state's evidence. Burke was executed, and as fit punishment, he was dissected after death, fitting the crime. But it's true. People actually had a fear that somehow this was nefarious. And again, it's not just this sort of vague Frankenstein idea that something supernaturally bad. It's that people were legitimately worried that real bad things were going to happen. And on top of that, the fact that there was class and race divide made it very prickly as a subject. And bodies have other problems. Again, they decay. They're hard to procure. They're hard to preserve. They're hard to handle. They putrefy, and that's really unpleasant, especially before preservation techniques. They can be messy. They can be smelly. So other people have attempted to solve this problem. And so one is Ozu. Ozu created papier-mâché models, and I use the term papier-mâché loosely. It was all sorts of things, sawdust and wood and horsehair and things. But he created models that could be taken apart, and they had some benefits. Unlike wax models, they didn't soften when you touched them, so they didn't deform over time. They didn't melt when it was hot. They tended to keep their shape, and you could handle them, and the pieces could come out, and you could learn more. And the funny thing is about Ozu basically claimed that, in fact, you wouldn't need to dissect a real body if you dissected one of his models. Now, I've seen them, and they're really good, but I don't think that they're identical to human bodies. But the argument was there, and he sold quite a number of these in his life. So what about today? This is an article from The Economist in 2014 about a shortage of cadavers. It says we're running out of bodies. And he says, they are inert, smelly, and upsetting to look at. It's a wonder that dead bodies are in such high demand. But he claims that, in fact, they are in high demand and that we're running out of them. Now, this is something I think that we can talk about, and we can ask Dr. Drake if this is actually true. But one of the things that they mentioned in the article is that better identification of bodies, fewer unclaimed bodies, fewer bodies fit for dissection, which in this particular article meant that people are living longer, and you don't actually have many young, healthy bodies to show what a young, healthy body or cadaver would look like, and that there are just simply more medical students than there are bodies. Now, this is something we can problematize here shortly. But this article says, what do we do if we run out of bodies? What are we going to do to solve this dilemma? This is Ozu. This over here is from Syndaver Labs. It's a synthetic cadaver company that makes and sells pretend bodies for the purposes of dissection. And if you go to their website, they're very keen to say, much as Ozu said, that you wouldn't need to dissect a real body if you had one of ours. Is that really true, though? Is it the same thing, dissecting a false body, as it is to dissect a real body? Would it solve the problems of our fear and dread? What about body brokering? Is there still a fear today that bodies will go places we don't expect, a different kind of grave robbery? In the end, is dissection as important today to anatomy and to medicine as it was in the past? Is it still a new way of seeing into the body, of training professionals? Is it still a means of making those connections between disease and causation, just as it used to be? Or is it somehow on its way out? And these are questions that are being actually addressed and discussed today. And so I would like to welcome Dr. Drake to come up here and join me for a short conversation or mini panel. And after that, we'll open this up to the wider audience.
So I'm glad to see all of you here tonight, and I'm thrilled that I was asked to come and sort of interact in this atmosphere, and hopefully we'll get to a lot of your questions as we go further on. And If you have anything at all, don't be bashful to ask it. I've been doing this for a few years, more few than I wish to remember maybe, but I've been doing it for quite a long, not as long as some of the history here, but pretty long. So I don't know what you want to do next then.
Well, I think what we're going to do is we'll have a seat here, and I will ask you some questions. But I also wanted you to let them know what was in the pamphlets. Those are out on the table out there.
Yeah, so what I did was I brought some pamphlets and some paperwork related to our body donation program at Cleveland Clinic. And I'm going to stand up while I'm talking.
Yeah,
about
go ahead.
this. Just to let you know, in body donation programs, just some history on that. In the United States, there are kind of two different arrangements of body donation programs related to medical schools. In the state of Ohio, every medical school has their own body donation program. So that's one example of how they do that. In the state of Indiana, there's an Indiana Anatomical Board, and there's one location where all the bodies come to, and then they send them out to the other medical schools. Now, Indiana's different too because it only has one medical school, and it has a bunch of branch campuses around the state. Florida also has a state anatomical board, and in Florida they go to two locations. Maryland has a state anatomical board. So it's run different ways in different states. Here, Case has a body donation program. Northeast Ohio School has one, and Cincinnati, we had one. Everybody gets different numbers. My program at Cincinnati was very large, between 300 and 350 bodies a year donated there. When I came up to the Cleveland Clinic, they had a body donation program, but nobody knew about it. And they got about 20 to 30 bodies a year. And their body donation program actually was written into the founding papers of the Cleveland Clinic back in 1921. And so when I came up and they explained, here's what we want you to develop for an anatomy program, and I said, well, then we got to get a whole lot more bodies into this program, or it's not going to work. Because I said, I need to have 100, or it's not going to happen up here. And last couple years, we've gotten 170. And it really relates to sort of how you set the program up. Some schools you have to sign up ahead of time. Case Western Reserve School of Medicine, their program at this campus, you have to sign up ahead of time. If you don't sign up ahead of time, then they won't take your body. My program, I've never used that as a criteria because I want as many bodies as I could get. So in Cincinnati, because again, not because I love to get dead bodies, but the situation is the more I get, then the more programs I can have. And that's clearly come to fruition at the clinic, because it's sort of like if you build it, they will come. And we now, as I said, it had got 20 to 30. We now get 170, and they're all used. And today, for an example, I had 4 bodies out that were being used by emergency medicine residents, and they were doing all kinds of emergency procedures. They do that program once a year with the lower level residents. We also had OBGYNs, people working on 2 cadavers. They were with their residents, and they were working on surgical procedures. Tomorrow, I've got dermatology people coming in the morning. So again, I can have more programs because I've increased the number of donations. And that's kind of the value in the United States. One of your questions was, are we running out of bodies? I really don't think so. If I talk to my connections in the Midwest, we have ups and downs, but generally we get reasonable numbers every year. If you go to cities like New York, they don't get as many, and they do have shortages. And so schools in the Midwest generally supply some of the schools in New York City or in some other areas. So I wouldn't say that we're running out of bodies. Things have changed dramatically. Very few schools in the United States ever take an unclaimed body anymore. We used to, back when I started in this business, back in the early 70s when I was in grad school, we did take an unclaimed body once in a while from the local coroner's office. Now virtually nobody does that, mostly because we don't have to. And also the coroners have changed their rules, so they usually keep a body for 2-3 weeks. Well, by the time they've had it for 2 or 3 weeks, the normal embalming process isn't going to work. Also, I use unembalmed bodies. We have the only program in the United States, actually in the world, but leave it in the United States, that uses all unembalmed bodies. So my program is very different than a typical program, and we have to go in and out of refrigerators and all this stuff. But again, the unclaimed bodies don't work. So actually medical schools have sort of gotten away from that, and in many cities, The county has an agency, and they get a contract with a local funeral director and that with a local cemetery, and it's not Pauper's Field anymore. It's actually in burial sites in a cemetery, and so they bury the unclaimed people now. So you kind of don't have to worry about it, and they're really not available. But it's nice because the medical schools just as soon stay out of the business anyhow. And so that's one of these changes that's occurred.
Which actually, you've just covered question 1, so we'll move on to question 2.
Can they ask if yet, or are you
That's
waiting?
for later. That's for
Okay.
later. Yep. So you guys will get a chance, though, I promise. Some people wonder,
I'm gonna stand up.
you know, if why is dissection still practiced? That's a question that has occurred a couple of different times, and you know, I've shown historically why it was practiced. Would you say that's the same today? Do you think that we still practice dissection for the same reasons, or do you think that there's different reasons today for practicing?
Well, it's still important, and I've never been a big fan of the term using a rite of passage. Okay, just because I just don't like that thought. All right, the value of it is to learn. And that's basically why we do it. And it's because if you're looking at a picture in a book, then you would also like to look at the real thing, so that then when you look at the picture of the book, you can think about what you saw in the cadaver. And then you're going to remember it better. And I think what's happening is there are discussions going on, and we'll talk more about this later, about do we really need cadavers and this and that and the other thing. I honestly have not seen anything yet that replaces the cadaver. Now, there are some things that maybe have some possibilities, but I haven't seen anything that I would say replaces my cadaver. Now, the trick is now, though, is to be very efficient in how you teach. And the idea of having this technique and models and cadavers and bones and all of these things is really to help the learning process. If I have more devices that I can show to the students, then it's going to help them be better learners. Because we also have an audience of students that learn different ways. They learn visually, they learn by contact, they learn by auditory. So we need to have all these different devices and different ways to learn so that we can help all the different types of students. So dissection is just one of these other ways. It doesn't end with the medical school part, though, and that's the point. When you have a program like we do, and we're right next to a hospital, we have residents over there all the time doing research projects possibly, but practicing things. Somebody wants to do a scapular flap on Friday morning. They said, you got a body we can do a scapular flap on? I said, sure. And so that's sort of what you're also doing is with the cadavers, is getting these things in there.
What's a scapular flap?
It's with plastic, so they take some skin from over here and they're moving it around to do something else where the person may have had a lesion, and so they're trying to fill what was damaged tissue that they took out. And so again, we make these things possible. The first face transplant that was done at the Cleveland Clinic, they've now done 2 of them here and 1 of them somewhere else. They practiced that down in our lab for the second, well, they did the 3rd one. The 2nd one was done somewhere else. That morning, they were doing a face transplant in my lab, and then that afternoon, they started the 24-hour surgery on the person doing the real thing.
So in some ways, it does seem to be rather similar in the sense that it's practice, it's new ways of learning, connecting the dots, so to speak, similar to the history, though with multimodal technologies helping to secure that, right?
Right, and that's what we would be trying to go for. And I think the reason, well, I'll tell you, one of the reasons the new building, which I'm sure all of you have heard about, the health education campus, that's the combined Cleveland Clinic Case West River building.
They're building a building together that would be the first 2 years of medical school for both groups.
Yes, and the School of Dentistry and the School of Nursing and the PA program are all going to be in the same building. And it's the big hole in the ground that's being put between Chester and Euclid, and there's like, I went by today, there's like 5 cranes. And they're taking out, I don't know how many football fields of dirt
I
to
thought that
build
was an
this
art
thing.
installation. Sorry.
Yeah, really, it's amazing. But part of the reason that there was a the story is there's no dead bodies going to be in the new building. Now, part of the problem with that is with embalmed bodies, then you have a chemical situation. And the chemical situation can be problematic, but it also is hugely expensive. And no one wanted to pay for and donate, do you want to donate $5 million and have your name put up on the HVAC system for the cadaver lab? Not really. So that was one of the true problems with the new building, is they didn't want to spend a fortune putting in an HVAC system, period. So that sort of led to more things, and so right now, in the new building, there will not be any dead bodies. There will be anatomy labs, but they're going to hopefully do all the education virtually. We'll see, okay? Because again, the point I make, and my dean was supposed to come tonight, and he's not, but he'll probably look at the film. You can have all the cute virtual stuff in the world, and I'm all for it. I have no problems using everything that somebody can develop that I can find useful and educational, and that's the point. The virtual stuff looks cute, looks pretty, great, but you got to make it educational. And if you can't make it educational, then it's of very little value. And so that's sort of right now is how do we make this stuff educational? Some of the things they have now, you may have heard of the anatomage table. So it's this big table that everybody stands around. You can only push the button at one place though, because if you push the button in another, or touch the table in another place, it throws the table all out of whack. Well, it's mostly imaging. Well, if you have a good imaging system, I can reproduce the imaging right there in my lab, bringing it over from the Cleveland Clinic system. But this table costs $70,000 plus 8 to 10 to have a service contract, and they tend to break. So again, to me, that's not really replacing a cadaver because it's just not getting the job done. And I was at a meeting and last spring, and I walked up to another group called the VH Dissector. This is another table, all right. And I walked up, played dumb, and I said, I didn't say who I was. I hid my name tag just in case they would have recognized the name. So I said, show me what they got. They go, oh, we've worked on this, and it looks just like a real cadaver, not embalmed, but like the real thing. And I looked at it and said, nope, sorry, I use the real thing, and you're not even close yet. But again, that's sort of what the product people are saying they can produce, and it's actually it's not really quite there yet. Now, we've got some other things with this new building, and so we'll see where this all ends up.
And this is a claim, again, that was made by Ozu, and that was also made by Sindaver Labs, that you can replace. And I think that'll be one of the questions that I'll ask you guys to discuss in your roundtables. But the last question I have has more to do with body donation itself, actually, and people's concerns and worries about it, particularly because the news has carried stories about body brokering and bodies ending up where they're not supposed to be, people doing unethical practices. And so I was wondering, I know you were cited in an article recently in Detroit where there was an issue of unethical sourcing. And I was wondering, is that a factor? Is there some way to put people's minds at ease? Is this a real problem that people need to be considering? Is there something they can do to keep that from happening if they themselves are interested in donating their bodies to science?
Yeah, this is an interesting. For my National Association, I usually get the phone call from the National Association saying, will you call this person in the newspaper and talk about this? Yeah, the way to not have a problem with it is to donate your body to a medical school, period. Now, there are a few good companies that, there's one down in Memphis where they've got an education center, and it's run by an orthopedic company, or a couple of them, and they are doing a correct job. They have a good body donation program. They're doing the teaching right there. It's pretty much, that one seems to be fine, but you have other ones that are not so fine. But also some medical schools in the past have gotten into trouble, and it's usually because there's a lot of money in this. And when there's money involved, people are going to do things. So not necessarily the person that would be overseeing the program like me, but the person I would hire at the level below may decide he's going to go off on his own. There's one medical school in the United States where the guy and his wife started a business. So they started sending things out the door unbeknownst to anybody else. They're now in jail. So it is a problem. My National Association try and keep watching this, and we try and get these programs to follow the rules. And some of the rules are, if I'm taking it, like in Cincinnati, if I was going to send my bodies maybe to Cleveland or to another medical school where they didn't have bodies, so I'm trying to help them out, we had it on our donation form, and it said, do you want to be studied just in Cincinnati? And so people could mark that. And if they marked it, they stayed in Cincinnati. So what the medical schools have tried to do is have everything up front. We let you know exactly kind of what not the exact use, but that it's going to be here or it could go somewhere else. We never really sort of say or give a report back to a family saying what we did with a body. No medical school does that. That becomes problematic. We do all cremate. If anybody's wondering about that, all the bodies are cremated. From every medical school in the United States, they do them somewhat differently maybe, but we cremate here separately, so I can return the specific ashes to the family. Case does the same thing. Cincinnati did the same thing. Most schools do that. There are some slightly differences on that. So you give that as an option to the family. But if you want to, generally, I think now most of the med schools, everybody's kind of staying with the law. But the idea is to, donate to a medical school, then you're okay. But there's a couple of companies in Arizona, and that's ones where I have some issues with them.
So,
where does the money come in? You said there's a lot of money involved.
Okay, so what happens, this case in Detroit, is this person was getting body parts, and then they would do a conference, an orthopedic conference, and you could get an upper limb for $700, a trunk for $2,000, a whole body for $6,000, basic price tag on every piece of the body. And so these companies donate bodies, and then they supply. Like if the Cleveland Clinic wants to do a program and they need 20 heads, I can't get them 20 heads. But so then they'll go to somebody like that, and I can't stop them, but I hope they at least go to a legitimate company. If they need 6 upper limbs to do a research study, I can't necessarily do all that. So that's where the money comes in. Now these companies say they're just recovering costs. The costs are a lot higher than what my costs were for a single cadaver when I shipped it to another medical school.
right. And the thing that I want to say, and actually we're going to hold questions until after the roundtables, but money was involved when the Burke and Hare murders were going on too. And in fact, all the resurrection men made money off of the sale of cadavers in general. So it is a really touchy issue, and it still remains that way today. And one of the things that I want us to discuss today are what are your own thoughts, fears, assumptions, and other things that you may have about bodies, body donation, dissection, and anatomy. And so we're going to split up the groups into smaller groups, and then we're going to float around. It will all come back into a big group, and that's when we'll actually share the individual questions and also the answers to what we've done here today on our roundtable. So let me separate you. This is going to be kind of difficult. So I think what we're going to do is these 2 rows here will be a group, and these 2 rows will be a group, and you can join these folks and be a group. This group here, you guys here, and you 4 get to be a group. I will pass out the questions, and I'll also put them up on the screen. You're welcome to write these the answers down if you like. We are collecting these. Again, as I said before, at the Dittrich, we are really interested in hearing your feedback. We have a project that we're working on right now, which is a digital project. And so all feedback from what you yourselves find interesting and what you want to talk about is very useful and interesting to us. So let me get these handed out. Okay, folks, so we are now going to, we're headed to the last dash. You've had a chance to kind of talk over these questions, and also you probably have come up with more questions. So what we want to do now is have a real conversation. I want to hear what your answers are, what your questions are, what your thoughts are. What has this discussion spurred for you? Nikki's got a mic, I've got a mic, and so we'll kind of start by going through the question list. It's completely fine if we depart from this once we get going. So I'm just going to start by asking who would like to be the first to go. Trust me, I'm sure we'll all have a chance to talk, so nobody rush the door first. I know it's always exciting to be first. I'm kidding. So how do you feel about body donation? I heard some really great stuff, particularly from this back group that I was hanging out with. And I'd like to start off by asking that question and see who wants to get us started. It can be individuals or as a group if there's specific things that you've talked about, yeah. And if you could stand up and face that way.
Several people in our group have already donated their bodies, so I'll just skip that part and say that I know many people who have done this because they want to save their family the cost of a very expensive funeral and feel like that they are doing some good. And I one time was reading some of the paperwork in at Neomed where someone had donated their body, and they were very, very old, and they felt almost worthless, but they loved the idea that they were going to do some good. And it was almost like reading a poem or something. It was very moving.
Thank you. Awesome. All right. Other groups, what did you have to say about this concept of body donation? Yeah.
Thank you.
Face that way.
Okay. Am I looking at the
Oh, you can look that way too.
Okay. So I think our group, the majority, I'm not sure I agree with them, but I think the majority of them probably wouldn't do body donations. Yeah, we were kind of all over the board with that. It was half-half. Myself personally, I think it'd be really important to do a body donation. I don't know if I would personally do it, but I think it's very important to do because I think the only way that we're going to be able to further research a lot of diseases and not good things happening and nowadays is by donating the bodies and kind of getting in there and not tearing things up, but really exploring the different capacities and different elements within the body. We won't really find out anything further unless we do that. So I think it's really interesting. I'd consider it, but I don't know if I would do it because I don't know the people who are going to be personally going into my body, and it's a little strange. So.
Yeah. Actually, that's interesting, and I know you didn't raise your hand, but I heard you say something similar over here. Is it okay? Would you mind sharing that? Because I thought it was fascinating.
Sure.
Okay.
So I personally, I'm living right now, and so I'm like a big pain baby. Like I hate being in pain. So just the thought of even though like I would be dead and I can't feel it, like someone else like doing things to my body is just like a really creepy thought. But I could totally see the benefit of like having a body donated that you could actively like see, feel, and touch, and actually work on it. It gives like a different perspective, and it's like the closest thing to the live human body. Like, wouldn't you want a doctor who already had an experience, actually kind of experimenting with the real close thing? And I know she actually provided a great example, like in music, when you try to teach a student, like you can't go tell them, go watch a video of a recorder and you can learn to play it. No, you want to give them the actual recorder. So I thought that was like a really great example.
Great, thank you. Great. Okay, other thoughts? Who else had thoughts about body donation? Yeah. Sorry, I'll put this side.
This just occurred to me. So I personally feel like I'm going to donate to something somewhere, if not the medical field. I know that there are other fields doing valid research, for instance, in the field of crime scene studies, things like that. And I personally, what's driving me is my faith. And so I'm wondering if there's studies done related to religion and who donates, religion and what people's views are on donating. Because that's very much a part of the human experience. And it's very valid, and other people don't want to donate because of their faith, and that's completely valid and understandable. And I'm just wondering, for that, so the human side of it, the humanity side of it and the religious side of it, what kind of studies have been done there?
That's a great question. I'm going to let Dr. Drake answer first, and then if any of the other rest of you have something to add to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so with regards to the religious aspect of it, the Catholic Church actually years ago, like in the 60s, said that donating your body to science or whatever was fine. When I had my memorial services, I would try to get someone from the Catholic faith, Protestant faith, and then someone from the Jewish faith. I always had a lot of trouble getting someone from the Jewish faith. Now, I know also we don't get that many donations from individuals that are Jewish. So clearly there is something related to that religious group. Now, I get asked a lot to come and talk to places on how to start a body donation program. Obviously not here, but in Africa or in Asia. And usually the first thing I tell them is get the religious leaders on your side. Because if you can get the religious leaders on your side, then the people will pay attention to what you're saying. The best example I have of that, in Asia, the body donation programs are very small. In India, they're very small. I mean, like a school in India might have 200 students and they have like 3 bodies. Mexico, they're generally very small. But there's a Buddhist medical school in Taiwan that has an absolutely amazing medical donation program. And it's because it's basically run by the monks. And they're all female monks, and they have an incredible program. And I was at their meeting there last December, and we came a day early so we could see their program in action when they were getting ready to start a new class. And what they did was they had the bodies out in a room, and they had the monks in another room with all the families, and we kind of stood in the background, and they were going through a ceremonial thing, and then they took us into the lab, and we lined the outside. Then they brought the families in, and the families went by each cadaver that was their relative, and then the Buddhist monks came in and wandered around, and they said prayers over the bodies and something. Now, we would never do that in this country because it wouldn't work quite that well. Because of we try and make sure here everything is totally de-identified. And we do that because some people don't want other people to know that they donated their bodies.
Right.
Now, at the clinic, we do publish the names in the past year. And we do read the names at our memorial service because the group felt they wanted to do that. And I said, sure, fine. And we haven't ever gotten any issues with that. But again, that stuff is all stuff that goes different ways. But I've never seen anything in Asia like this ceremony. And they've written it up. They've done videos on it. And it's an amazing ceremony. Absolutely, we were just awestruck, the international people standing watching this thing. They do it every time they start a new class. Then when they're done with the bodies in the class, these are embalmed bodies, then they re-put them into coffins. They take them down the street, and they cremate them. And the monks are there again leading the things. The families are there. The medical students are there. And the medical students had all met the families of the person's body that they were working on.
Which is
now,
very
we do that a little bit. Some schools do that a little bit in this country, but again, that's not highly practiced in this country. But that's the kind of the religious aspect. Is I always tell people to get the religious leaders on your side because that's the only way it's going to work.
That's great.
I'm a preacher's kid, so you should know.
He's with it. He's with it. No, that's a really great question. And actually, if anyone else has other thoughts or ideas about this, I actually study grieving rituals in other cultures, and it's really interesting. And some of the differences are related to not just the religion, but the entire cultural way of handling death and dead bodies, and their familiarity with it is quite distinct. So anyone else want to comment on that?
What's the Muslim take on this?
I'm not sure. Does anyone? The question there was Islam and its relationship to body donation. Does anybody have any?
They have medical schools. Obviously, they do things separate. So the women work on women bodies only. They're taught only by women. And the men are only taught by men. It's some of the regular, at least in Saudi, I know of. I honestly don't know how or why how they deal with the body donation aspect. I just know of. I was supposed to go there once, and we decided not to go. I'm kind of a little careful on places I go.
Being a preacher's
They
kid.
wanted to go to Iran, and I said no. I look like way too American. It just really doesn't work out sometimes. But I'm not sure, and no one talks much about it. We were afraid when we published our book, our textbook, that we were going to get some grief in the Muslim community and countries, and we actually didn't, which surprised us, because we had a lot of surface anatomy, naked pictures that actually no anatomy books had ever had quite as a real thing, much as we were showing. And that actually didn't cause a problem, and our book is used in Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, Saudi. Wow. So I know it's used in Muslim countries.
That's awesome. All right, so again, these are great questions. This is exactly the kind of discussion I think that we need to be having about these things. Let's move on. So we've kind of covered some of these. We can talk a little bit about why you think people are still worried about it, why it's taboo, or we can attack one of the other questions. Who would like to go next?
Thank you so much.
Do you want to stand up?
I was thinking. Want me to stand? Okay. I can do that. Do you mind if I address rather than? Okay.
So I was thinking about question 2, and some of you know me. I'm a graduate student at Case Western. I'm getting my PhD in anthropology, and I'm doing my dissertation fieldwork on professional role development in medical education, working with first and second year medical students in the anatomy lab. And I'm actually presenting next week at a conference on the topic of, sort of why is anatomy still in the curriculum? What role does it play? Why is it important? And so I thought I would share my conclusion, my finding with you, so you get a little sneak peek. And in response to question 2, I just wanted to say that, a lot of times it's talked about as sort of a patient-practitioner relationship. I tend not to think about it that way, or also as a rite of passage, because I think that something that's really important that's sometimes overlooked is that the relationship between the medical student and the cadaver is actually also a relationship between the medical student, the tools they use, and the cadaver, which we sort of mentioned. And also the relationship between the student, the cadaver, and the educational space in which they're trained. So if they're working in a lab where bodies are embalmed, for instance, the smell of formalin and the chemicals can be really distracting, and that affects the relationship that they have with the body and the nature of their training, and the nature of the relationship that they have with the cadaver, if at all. So I really would like to sort of invite everybody to think about not only our direct relationship from practitioner to body, or sort of a grave robber to body, but also to think about sort of the relationships that are mediated through the technologies that allow those relationships to happen. Because I think that they're also really important and perhaps another way to conceive of these relationships.
That's a great point. Actually, that brings us back a little bit to what I was saying earlier about Vesalius and what you bring with you to dissecting a body, or what you bring with you to the anatomy. It's not divorced from the cultural implications, and one of the reasons I've used the phrase rite of passage is partly not really contemporary, but having to do with the way it was perceived around the photos. I should have mentioned, people do not take photos with their cadavers now. That is unethical. That's not done. That's something that actually ended, what was the year?
1950.
1950. So, and some of that came about partly because there were donation programs, and also because you wouldn't necessarily want to see your relative propped up on a table and a photograph of it somewhere. So that's not practiced now, but it was kind of part of the milieu, that particular cultural moment in time. And so I like that idea about spaces, because that's really critical. We have this new space that's bringing together Cleveland Clinic and the Case Western. We have different kinds of lab spaces and which ones are going to be used and in what ways. So that's interesting. Anyone else want to comment on the sort of doctor-patient tools, spaces, or anything else that you want to bring up? We are starting to run short on time, so I'd like to hear from more of you.
We had sort of a small group back here of 4, but we were discussing a certain question I thought might be good to raise to the group as a whole. If you don't feel comfortable answering, don't. But show of hands, how many people plan on donating their body? So we have a lot in this group, actually. But how many of you are organ donors? Seems like a few more. And I know just different people that I've talked to about donation and what their plans are. People seem a lot more comfortable with the idea of organ donation. And one of the things we were talking about is possibly just knowing that that is going specifically to another person really affects how people feel about this gift kind of relationship. Whereas donating your whole body, you're giving more to an idea, to a profession that is somewhat disrespected in certain circles. So I'm just curious if this raises any further questions for the group, your feelings on donating an organ versus donating your body.
Oh, interesting. That's really interesting. Anyone want to comment on that in the... Yeah, actually.
I just actually have a question related to that. So, can you donate your body and donate your organs? Since both are somewhat fresh, if I can use that term, it just seems like you could have the best of both worlds and be able to accomplish, that type of approach. Is that even possible? Can you do that?
So, yes and no. So, yes, you can. So let's say if you sign up for a body donation program and you also have signed up for organ donation, normally the individuals we get are past the age where most organs are going to be acceptable for donation. So that's point number 1. Now, but you can still donate eyes. You can donate skin. We draw the line because you can donate bones and everything else, but we have to draw the line because there's a point where the body's no longer useful to us. So the way I've always followed the policy, in Cincinnati, since I use embalmed bodies there, then I would never stand in the way of a person donating their organs if they were like a 45-year-old that died and they could use all the organs. I'm not going to stop anybody. Okay, so that's, I always have run it that way. If they're older, they could still donate in Cincinnati. They could still donate skin and eyes. Okay. Here, the skin donation on a fresh cadaver, that doesn't work because that's going to cause me more issues. So eyes you can still donate. I will take autopsy cases. Most body donation programs won't take autopsy cases. The reason is I got people doing musculoskeletal stuff, and so I can use that body. So again, if I get bodies, then I can do more things. But as I said, the main thing with regards to organ donation is if it's something that really could be used somewhere, I'm going to go ahead and let them take everything they can use. Then I'll take the body anyhow, because then I also want to make sure that since the family was expecting to donate the body, I don't want to put them in a bad situation. So if you've signed up ahead of time, and I don't turn the body, now there's other things getting into this. If you have an infectious disease or this or that, I'm going to turn the body down. Most medical schools have weight limits and size limits. Just so you may not have known that, but regrettably that's the way it is. Because it's dangerous for me to handle a body if it's a large body, and also there's not as many things we can do with them. Now, I've got much more relaxed numbers than a lot of schools. Okay, so I go to a BMI of 40, 38 to 40. That's a pretty big person. But I have things that people want a larger body, so I can do that. But it's a body, the bigger body is hard for me to handle, and I'm putting myself or others in danger if we're not careful. So there's all these things that you kind of think about, and you have to deal with. Infectious disease, especially since I'm working with fresh cadavers, any suggestion of infectious disease, the body's not coming into my program, and that includes C. diff, MRSA, hepatitis B, C, HIV, pretty much anything else. Now when they come to me, I retest them for blood. We take blood and do blood tests. Now at Cincinnati, I never did that because I was embalming all the bodies. In theory, HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C do not survive embalming. Tuberculosis does, which we quit dissecting lungs back in the mid-'80s because you could aerolize the tuberculosis bacillus, and so then you could cause problems. So we don't cut lungs up anymore. At least we're not supposed to, even in embalmed bodies. Here, I retest HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C. I can't always be sure someone knows that they had it because they may not have come from a hospital. And I also, regrettably, I can't necessarily believe someone's going to be telling me the truth. Because if I turn a body down, then a family's going to be paying $2,000 to $5,000 to $10,000 for a funeral that they didn't expect to have to do. And people do donate their bodies because they want to save their family an expense. And so my policy has always been, if you're signed up in the program and you fit the things and don't have an infectious disease, even though if it was a traumatic death and I really can't use the body, no one knows that except me, I make those decisions, then I'll take the body no matter what.
Okay.
If you haven't signed up in the program, then I'm going to reserve the right to change my mind. Okay, so there's some of those kind of things. And again, I try and err in the wishes of the family or the individual. And that's why we tell families, talk this whole thing over before you get to this point.
Talk before there's tragedy.
Yeah.
All right, that's fantastic. We've actually run really short on time, and so what I would like to end with is partly to say to you, thank you, because you have you've come here not only to hear a talk, but to engage with us, to engage with history, to engage with today and expertise on things that are happening today. And I want to leave you with a different kind of invitation. So the Dittrich Medical History Museum, which I have a flyer here somewhere, I pointed out where we are. We're across the street from Severance Hall. We do have, this program is one in a series. It's the second one. There are 4 more this year, and they are held in various places. The next one will be at the Baker Nord Center, and that one, I believe, is on vaccines, I think. We have them on post-traumatic stress disorder will be one. And in all of these, we will look at the history, and we will also bring in an expert who we can talk to, or a panel of experts who we can talk to about what's going on today. And in each of them, your input really matters. The other thing that I would like to encourage you to do is to become one of the members of the Dittrich Museum. Hopefully you're all already members of the Natural History Museum. If you're not, you should look into it. But I'd like you to join the Dittrich Museum membership and And what this will allow you to do is actually come to our annual meeting this year, and we have these kinds of conversations. We want to hear from our members and from our participants to help us shape programming in the future, and also it's kind of a party. So,
We also have regular lectures.
oh yeah, and we also have regular lectures. Sorry, there's a lot of stuff going on. In fact, we have on November 19th, which is from ether to epidural, which is about anesthesia and birth. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. Jackie Wolf, who did the book Deliver Me from Pain, is actually going to be speaking. It's a reception, and it's the opening of our new 19th century gallery of birth and reproduction and midwifery, and it's really exciting, so you should go. And we have additional lectures throughout the year. So I would like you guys to think about joining. There's brochures out on the table. You can actually purchase your membership online, because we're all digital now. And it means that you will get regular updates and emails and other things from our programs. But let me end just by saying thank you, and let's give all of you a tremendous round of applause.